We're actually quite fashionable right now. I know, I was surprised as well. On my days off, I look like a hobo, and it's not my appearance or choices in clothing that's a hit with the in crowd. It's my hobby, retro gaming. I've been a retro gamer since before retro gaming was a thing. I grew up in a household with 2 younger brothers and a father who all enjoyed playing games. So when it was my brother's turn on the Packard Bell, I would end up on the Amstrad playing Burning Rubber, a system from 1990 being played as late as 1997, which according to Wikipedia was when the term retro gaming was coined. The same feat was performed with my old Packard Bell. I'd alternate between more modern 3D Windows titles on the new Pentium and playing DOS games around the turn of the new millennium. That's also retro gaming, since the machine was almost 7 years old at that point, and I was even going as far as to emulate the Game Boy on it. Emulation was soon to become the staple of the hobby, and little did I realise that I was once again on the very crest of the wave to come. So I've started the video talking about the here and now, then proceed to talk about the past, and the subject matter is the future. Is there some glorious DOS gaming renaissance happening that you're all previously unaware of? No, not really. There are some nice independent titles, but for the most part, DOS gaming is over. Its best games have been released, and decades ago at that. The best part? There's probably hundreds of great ones you never got a chance to play that you can pick up right now and give a go. The future looks bright for DOS gaming, despite its peak happening in the mid-90s according to most. Why, you ask? Because there are at least 3 different concerted efforts that have sprung up in modern times to make DOS gaming better in the here and now, and all of them are legitimately exciting. Most importantly, the resourcefulness of DOS gamers never ceases to amaze me. Having already had first-hand experience of remaking a DOS game on a newer engine, I had a front row seat to watch the colossal and obsessive effort that goes into such an achievement. Whether it's building new engines outright to play old games in so that they have native support in newer operating systems, using the source code, or transplanting older games into newer engines by recreating or remastering the assets and maps, or performing a function-by-function re-implementation of the games whose source code is unavailable by monitoring the calls of the executable and reverse engineering it, or any other number of incredible technical feats that the likes of me can't even fathom or simply forgot to list. The new life that developers breathe into older games simply because they're giving back the hundreds of hours of joy they receive playing them is staggering. So many of these projects are non-commercial, run by small teams, and sometimes take decades to come into fruition, and more often than not appear because developers have missed an absolute trick by failing to do so themselves. Once these games reach parity with modern titles, their content and design and execution often make them better than what came after. Now, I'm not saying if you took Lord of the Rings from 1990 and stuck it in the Divinity Original Sin 2 engine that it would be better than that game, because there are still some great modern titles appearing now and then, but if you did it with Ultima 7, chances are it would be. As game creation becomes easier and acquisition of assets and design does too, you're going to see more and more of your favourite classics find new life thanks to these projects, whether they're spearheaded by people our age or a younger developer who remembers their parent playing it. Having mentioned it already, Divinity Original Sin and its sequel are great examples of games that are heavily inspired by DOS, as the studio founder's sole purpose in life for a while appeared to be wanting to capture the spirit of Ultima 7 but in a more modern engine. They spotted a gap in the market that wasn't adequately covered by many of the bigger games companies, and proceeded to fill it to massive success. Others are doing the same, finally noticing what I've been saying for years. Hey, why don't they make games like that anymore? Like the ones on DOS? The best example of this influence is the absolute rash of first-person shooters that worship at the feet of DOS gaming pioneers Ken Silverman and John Carmack. And it goes far further back than that. Whether modern titles borrow the aesthetic of DOS games or their complexity, or even have the same developers as the original they ape, there are thousands of newer titles coming out that wear their influences firmly on their sleeves. Now, because this is modern gaming, there are more misses than hits, but since you've got the entire back catalogue of the best period of games development history to sift through in the meantime, you're now in a position where you can leisurely wait with patience. Pick up the odd promising modern title here and there for pennies, long after it's been heavily reviewed and critiqued and patched, and enjoy it if you want, assuming you're not too busy playing yet another brilliant DOS game you couldn't afford back in the day. And if you can't find anything, well, the same applies. Your old games are available for you to pick up and enjoy instead. And the good news? They can be played on more platforms than ever before. Every year that goes by, there's a new improvement for the games you loved. Whether it's better scalers, better sound options, improved emulation accuracy, new pieces of hardware that mimic the classic tech of old, or even more content. DOS gaming keeps improving long after the systems that originally housed it have stopped being sold. DOSBox forks like DOSBox Staging improve the sound quality and graphics with better sound font and OpenGL support, while others like DOSBox Pure integrate automated controller mapping and the ability to rewind your games within RetroArch, while having graphical menus for the user to access, essentially making every title, in theory, a controller-friendly experience that you can play from the comfort of your sofa. You can even have hardware emulation now with the likes of the Mr. AO486 core, or the XT core I believe it's called, which can play the game exactly as you remember it, but with no screen-tearing issues and even better sound for supported titles if you attach a Raspberry Pi running MT32 Pi. All of these things are recent developments, and coincidentally all three projects came out in 2020. They're not decades old like the original DOSBox, which is very slow at being updated and quite resistant to change. And whether you see that as a good thing or not, all three seek to offer an alternative of sorts to that. DOS gamers have seen the world of emulation for fixed hardware systems grow and improve exponentially, because the hardware is, well, fixed. If every game plays perfectly on one spec, it's easier to emulate. Concurrently, these fans are noting just how little their DOS gaming options have changed in that time. So instead of being seen as this dinosaur of the past that can't be taken further, DOS gaming is now on the forefront of this sweeping alteration, courtesy of both communities and corporations. There are obvious detractors to this who want games to remain the same for the purposes of historical preservation or simply because they don't feel it should be any other way, and that's fine, but having the choice to do it another way rather than no choice at all is always better in my book. More and more people are expressing discontent at how the modern games industry is operating, and the resulting titles it spews forth to insult our intelligence. And by examining the past, they're not only offering a previously missing alternative to that depressing mainstream, but also improving past titles in the process. The frontrunner for this vast modification is always going to be Doom, and I've talked about how much you can radically alter this classic DOS shooter in previous videos on the channel. More and more games are going to get this treatment over time, and companies like Night Dive specialize in it. Sure, it's not always going to be roses, there are lazy ports and conversions and open source projects that were abandoned, and I know of at least one DOS game that has an erotic fan fiction remaster instead of an actual remaster, but that's the price you pay for the good things that come out of such meddling. DOS gaming is alive and well, demand is high, and being able to fly in glorious widescreen with full texture mapping and modern effects as a member of the Empire one last time was completely worth the thousands of hours of community labour. So the future's bright, and I can't wait to see what wonderful projects are around the corner that will undoubtedly continue to prove that we lived through the greatest moments in gaming history. And that's why DOS gaming is better than what we have now, because even after all this time, it's still getting better.